our Around the World segment tonight, the U.S. has decided to pull out of a United Nations agency over rampant anti-Israel bias. The State Department notified UNESCO Director Irina Bokova of the U.S.'s decision to withdraw from UNESCO because of the anti-Israel bias and need for reform at the agency. Watch.
Two main issues prompted our decision. One was mounting arrears, which have been mounting since 2011 when this organization admitted Palestine as a member state. That amount in arrears is essentially unsustainable. Second issue, unfortunately, this venue has become politicized, undermining the work of UNESCO across its mandate. It's become a venue for anti-Israel bias. And unfortunately, we are taking the decision to withdraw from UNESCO at this time.
Perhaps this signals the time to consider withdrawing the United States from the United Nations altogether. With me now, former IDF soldier Mika Danzig. Mika, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
All right, Mika, I have to say this is a situation where I feel that it is about time.
Yes.
This is not the first time that this has happened, but I appreciate from the United States, from the State Department, them saying so clearly that the reason that we are withdrawing from UNESCO is anti-Israel bias, which has been something that's happened there for years and years.
It's been rampant, and this definitely falls under it's a good start from my perspective. More great work, in my view, from Nikki Haley for sure, and just clear ethical talk.
Right, and perhaps one of the most shocking parts, and this is what I want to dive into just a little bit here. One of the most shocking parts of this is how so many liberals are decrying this. They do not approve of the fact that the United States is withdrawing from UNESCO. They're essentially defending UNESCO's anti-Israel bias. Let's talk about what some of that is. I think we can start, not even historically, but let's start in modern history here, when President Obama, very liberal president, stopped paying dues to UNESCO because they welcomed Palestine as a member state.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a history here that goes back even before President Obama. President Reagan recognized that the inmates were running the asylum and that the UNESCO was undertaking significantly anti-liberal, in the classical sense, anti-democratic positions that were harmful to America and to America's view on democracy and individual freedom. And President Reagan pulled us out of UNESCO in 1983. We joined again because UNESCO undertook significant reforms, or so it said, and under that representation, President Bush W. in 2003 had us rejoin UNESCO. But since then, it's been very clear that those reforms were temporary and designed really to get America and its money, which in America pays for 1/5 of UNESCO's funds or budget, back into UNESCO. And since then, and even after President Obama essentially shot a warning shot across the bow to UNESCO in 2011 by withholding those payments, UNESCO has doubled down on their anti-Semitic, anti-Israel rhetoric. They're really in their flat earth resolutions, like you alluded to one before, on Jerusalem, where they claim Jerusalem and specifically the Temple Mount and the Western Wall of Jerusalem had no connection to Judaism or Christianity, and that they were just Arab Muslim holy sites.
Right, and I mean, we can talk about some of those examples, and I think we should, because we do have to counter the narrative that's coming from the left that this is only about arts, it's only about, furthering World Heritage sites. That's one of the things that UNESCO does, is they, I guess, identify or name, they declare these World Heritage sites, but in doing so, they don't do so in a fair way. They do so in a way that erases the history, the Jewish or Israeli history attached to some of these sites, which frankly is undeniable. You can't separate the two. They are inherently tied together. And we have the two main examples here. That is, of course, the old city of Hebron in the West Bank. UNESCO declared the Tomb of the Patriarchs to be an endangered Palestinian site. That
Right.
makes no sense.
Yeah, the Tomb of the Patriarchs. The patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? That's who we're talking about. The idea that these are not Jewish holy sites, not Christian holy sites, that they're, quote, Palestinian heritage sites. Again, for a state of Palestine that has never existed in history, it's a heritage site for them. Hebron is the second holiest city in Judaism, has been for 3,000 years. And yet the UN and UNESCO, in a flat earth resolution, just like it did with Jerusalem, denies the Jewish historical connection to Hebron and the Tomb of the Patriarchs. It's astounding, and it's purely political. And while people who are talking about UNESCO's good works are correct in some respects, sure, when historical sites outside of Israel are violated, when ISIS blows up ancient historical sites, or in Palmyra, or when the Taliban do it in Afghanistan, UNESCO decries it, and rightfully so. But then when the Arab world tries to rewrite history when it comes to the Jewish people, UNESCO is an ally of that, is a partner in crime. And that's something that the United States should not be a part of.
Right, and it's a shame, too, because UNESCO is essentially abusing an opportunity that they have to actually protect some endangered historical sites. They're abusing it by taking our money, fortunately not anymore now that we've withdrawn, but our tax money, giving it to people who just want to rewrite history and exclude Jews from something that I think arguably is perhaps the most Jewish thing you could possibly have, the tomb of Abraham. I mean, my goodness, if you can't declare that to be part of Jewish heritage, then you have a huge problem. Mika, let me ask you, big picture though, does this signal a time that it's time for the United States to seriously consider withdrawing from the United Nations altogether?
It certainly signals to the international community and to the UN specifically that you can't just count on America participating in an insane asylum, essentially, where the lunatics are running the asylum. The reality is that in every situation in the UN where it's not subject to a veto in the Security Council by the Big Five, where it's just subject to one country, one vote, the countries that are the least democratic, that are the most totalitarian, that provide the least human rights, they ironically control. They have the votes. They're allowed to participate in the UN in a democratic way, one country, one vote, when they don't give one person one vote in their own countries. If they continue to operate this way and continue to essentially go after only one country, the Democratic State of Israel, in a gang-like fashion where, last year there were 20 UN resolutions, General Assembly resolutions against Israel, 3 against all the other countries in the world, and none against the biggest human rights abusers like China and Russia, Pakistan, Qatar, etc. You name it. None, right? But yet 20 against Israel. That's not something that the United States and other democratic countries should participate in.
No, and in my opinion, the burden of proof falls on the United Nations to prove to us why it is of value to us to be part of their organization. And as it's sitting right now, I see very little value anymore in being part of an organization whose 2 primary objectives seems to be pushing the climate change agenda and tearing down the state of Israel. That I don't want my money going towards, and I don't see the value in that. Mika, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
All right.